everybody. Welcome to another edition of Live with the Dietitian. Sorry I am a few minutes late hopping on. I had some technical difficulties, but overcame. So today's talk is going to be, I'm just going to adjust you a little bit. So, well, first of all, my name is Erin Walters. I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also a fitness instructor at the YMCA and Family Wellness. So May is awareness month for a lot of different things. One of them being which is stroke awareness and heart health awareness. So the item I want to talk about today is heart healthy diet, in particular sodium. So if you've ever been in any sort of first aid training or even at the doctor's office, you've heard about stroke, risk prevention, stuff like that. The first thing I want to talk about, really important, is how to identify if you're having a stroke, because it's really easy. You just use the acronym FAST, F-A-S-T. The F stands for facial drooping. So if you notice that you have a sudden onset of facial drooping, that's a sign. A is, I'm blinking out here. So, like actions, like arms, you have weakness in your arms. S, speech. Your speech suddenly slurs, slows down, becomes garbled. You can't make sense of what you're trying to say. And T is the time of the onset of symptoms, because they are sudden, and as soon as you recognize those symptoms, you want to seek medical attention immediately. Call 911, get into a medical provider immediately. It is emergent and it could save your life. So F-A-S-T, facial drooping, arms, speech, time. Anyway, let's talk about prevention. One of the key risk factors in of having a stroke is going to be blood pressure. So we as a society tend to have elevated blood pressure all over. Hi Anna, I see you too. So I know, I struggled getting on, I'm good now. So just collecting my thoughts. So blood pressure, hypertension. It's also known as the silent killer. So the reason it's called the silent killer is that there's really no clear signs or symptoms if you're hypertensive, if you have high blood pressure. So if you have fluid retention, things like that, that could be a sign. Usually it's just indicated when you go get your annual checkup, or if you go to the doctor for any reason. Some personal trainers and some health facilities may offer screenings. I know a lot of pharmacies offer screenings. So you want to make sure that you know your numbers. Even if you don't have a hereditary risk, know your numbers. I am typically about a 110/70. So I know my numbers, and I pay very close attention to them, because heart disease and stroke are a risk factor in my family. So I'm very careful to make sure that I am aware of what my health risks are. So if you have a systolic number, so you have that top number and the bottom number, if that top number is over 120, that puts you at hypertension risk. So you want to make sure that you're talking with a medical provider about that. If that bottom number, that diastolic number, is over 80, that's a hypertensive risk. So you want to make sure that you're seeking medical, that you're just making an appointment with your doctor, talking about your options, getting on some sort of preventative plan, so you're not at that point where you get into a hypertensive crisis, which would be like 189/100. We don't want to see numbers like that, because that means that you're in a hypertensive crisis. Your blood and your heart is working way harder than it should be. So what does sodium have to do with all this, right? Like, what is she babbling about? Why do I care? Why is this dietitian on here talking about blood pressure? Guess what? The number one dietary factor in blood pressure and hypertension is sodium. Good old-fashioned salt, right? We love salt. We love to season our food with salt. Americans, 75% of Americans consume way too much sodium, way too much salt. Salt is a preservative. It's in all our foods to keep them shelf stable longer. Salt is flavoring. So it's got chemical components. It helps with osmolality and solubility, and there's just many, many reasons why there's salt in our foods. Salt is an essential nutrient that our body needs, along with calcium and protein. It is an electrolyte. There are certain aspects of your body that need salt to function. So we don't want to eliminate salt completely. You never want to say, I'm on a no salt diet. You want to be on a reduced sodium eating plan or a no added salt eating plan. So how much salt is too much salt? Sorry, I'm reading questions as they pop up here. Anna, I will get to low blood pressure in just a minute. So what happens is when we take in too much sodium, it takes water. Water is drawn to that sodium. So we retain fluid. And when we retain fluid, think of a water balloon in the blood vessels. They kind of expand. So now the blood that's pumping through those vessels is pumping at a higher pressure. And what happens is you get tiny little tears inside our arteries, inside those blood vessels, and they start to heal with scar tissue. Well, that scar tissue makes it so you start getting a buildup of plaque, cholesterol, things like that. And pretty soon you have narrowing. So it's kind of a vicious cycle because you get these damaged blood vessels from the increased pressure that are trying to heal and then are starting to collect plaque, and you start running the risk of blockages, which is what causes a stroke. So we really want to take our sodium intake into consideration. The new dietary guidelines for Americans, it used to be about 4 grams or less a day was what was recommended. That has changed to 2.3. That's 2,300 milligrams of sodium. That is 1 teaspoon of table salt. So that's how much it's gone down because the risk of hypertension and the instances of hypertension has gone up so much. So they've really, the dietary guidelines for Americans has really brought that down to a much lower level. Very few of us take in less than 2,300 milligrams. It is hard to do, and I'm going to show you why. I have in front of me foods that I've taken out of my pantry, and I'm just going to kind of give you an idea of where you can find those secret little hiding spots for sodium. Then we're going to talk about what we can do to make some changes. Doesn't have to be drastic. Like everything else, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So it is okay to have some salt in your diet, and it is okay to eat some of those foods, but moderation is key, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I know this question is going to come up, it's asked a lot. I have 2 different kinds of salt here. I have good old-fashioned iodized salt, and I have sea salt. Now you may see some articles out there or some recipes or things that say, well, you have less sodium if you use sea salt versus the iodized salt, the regular table salt. Per tablespoon, it is about the same, or per teaspoon. So there's still the same amount of sodium in both of these. However, the concentration of flavor is a little higher in sea salt, so we tend to use a little bit less, which is how the sodium decreases a little bit. So, ounce per ounce, the sodium content is going to be the same, but we tend to use a little bit less because they're larger crystals on the sea salt. So that's where that myth comes in that sea salt is better for you than table salt. There's really no more nutritional value to sea salt other than it's a texture and it has a little extra added flavor, so you're able to use a little bit less. So that's where that comes from. That is the salt. So how about can of soup, right? So this is Progresso. This is a traditional, good old-fashioned can of chicken noodle soup. So now I said what, 2,300 milligrams a day is what we should aim for in sodium. There's 670 in one serving. So there's 2 servings in this can. So if you eat this whole can of soup, which is only for the whole can, 200 calories, perfect addition to our lunch, right? 1,500 milligrams. Half of your sodium intake just in the soup. That doesn't account for the bread in the sandwich that you had that went along with the soup, the salt on the saltine crackers that went along with the soup, the sodium in the cheese that you maybe had on the crackers that went along with the soup. So your meal was probably your max intake of sodium for the day. So that is something to think about. Now, how do you know how much sodium is? It's going to be backwards on here, but when you look at the food label, it's going to tell you sodium. It's going to tell you exactly how much sodium there is per serving. So you want to make sure that you're taking the time to read the labels when you go shopping and maybe picking different options. So now you can get low sodium versions of soup. Healthy Choice has low sodium versions. I think Progresso actually does have some low sodium. You'll maybe see 1/3 of the sodium. They're still gonna have some in there because they need it for the preserving and for the flavoring, but just kind of get it, you know, in the back of your mind to check those food labels. It's not all about fat, calories, protein. Those minerals that we ingest, those make a difference too. So you can look at that. Tomato sauce. Who doesn't love spaghetti, right? We had spaghetti for dinner last night, and I used this tomato sauce, by the way. 1/2 cup. We probably put a little bit more than a 1/2 cup on our noodles, but 410 milligrams. So any sort of tomato-based product is going to be sneaky. Tomato juice, tomato sauce, tomato paste, diced tomatoes, anything like that, salsa, is going to have sodium. So you can look for lower sodium versions of that too, or you can make it from scratch using fresh tomatoes, however you like it. But tomato sauce is another one that is big on sodium. So that's another way you can look for lower sodium options. So I'm going to see if I have frozen corn here. So, corn, right? Canned corn, frozen corn. Both have great source of fiber. Both have good nutrition. They both have potassium. And they both have a little bit of calcium. They're both high in niacin. Both good choices. However, think of the preservatives it takes to keep canned foods shelf stable. This can of corn has 260 milligrams per serving. There are 3 servings in this can. 3 servings. So if you eat the whole can of corn, you're up around 700 milligrams. That's 1/3 of what you need. How about this one? Sodium. This is just fresh frozen corn. 0. So there you go. When you ask, well, what's the difference between canned foods and frozen or fresh? It's how they're preserved. So when you're looking at sodium, now just basic nutrition, getting those fruits and vegetables in, that's great. Go with the canned corn. It's not going to make or break. But if you have a choice and you're wondering, or if sodium is a factor and is something you're really looking at, going fresh or frozen is going to be the better option. So, the other thing I wanted to show you, crackers. We all like to snack on crackers, right? So I have Triscuit rosemary and olive oil. I have Townhouse focaccia crackers, rosemary and olive oil. I'm not advocating either brand here. I'm just showing how you can make a comparison when you're shopping to look at what is what. Obviously, I love both these things. They're both in my house. So this isn't me saying pick one over the other. This is me just showing you the difference. The Triscuits have 130 milligrams of sodium in 6 crackers. So, okay, that's not too terribly bad. I mean, it's a little bit high. They're pretty salty. They do have low sodium versions. The Focaccia ones have 90 milligrams in 3 crackers. So look at the serving size. It's not the same. There's actually the same amount of sodium in both of these because this is only 3 crackers and this is 6. So don't let those labels fool you. Who has kids, right? Good old-fashioned Kraft macaroni. So 3 servings per container, 560. Not terrible. Usually, if you're looking at a meal, if you can keep your meal to under 800 for that meal, that's pretty good. Because if you multiply that, times 3, then you're right around 2,400. That's wonderful. So this isn't going to make or break it. What I would do is maybe instead of serving the canned corn with this, go ahead and serve the frozen corn with this, and looking at it that way. So. All right, sorry, I'm reading questions here. So one of the questions that came up earlier in our talk today was low blood pressure. Low blood pressure, sorry, I can't talk today, is called hypotension versus hyper. Hyper, high, hypo, low. Hypotension. That means that your blood volume is too low or your heart rate is too low and you're not sufficiently pumping blood through your body in an adequate amount or an adequate amount of time. So instead of that bam, bam, bam of high blood pressure, it's slow and the blood isn't traveling as fast as it should. This is where we run the risk of fainting, getting really lightheaded because that blood's not getting up to the brain. So that is another thing. You can get hypotensive for a very different reasons. If you're feeling lightheaded a lot, if you're feeling really tired, if you are, having fainting spells, definitely need to talk to your medical provider and get that blood pressure checked. Because whether it's really high or really low, we want to be careful because they both have consequences. So that was a good question. Salt substitute is the other thing that I want to chat about is what can we use to replace the sodium in our food? So where Americans take in too much sodium, we tend to not take in enough potassium. So you can look for salt substitutes. If you have normal kidney function and no other issues where potassium needs to be restricted in your intake, then you can look for salt substitutes like a potassium chloride versus a sodium chloride. That you can get those in the grocery store. They have salt substitutes there. You could do some sort of seasoning like this Mrs. Dash. They have a lot of different varieties there. Powders, garlic powder, onion powder, all sorts of stuff. Another tricky one, this is the number one. The number one sneaky sodium is soy sauce. 1 tablespoon of soy sauce, about 1,000 milligrams. So think about that when you're already eating Chinese food. It's going to be salty anyway. A lot of monosodium glutamate, right? Sodium's right in the word. So think about things like that. Barbecue sauce, salad dressings, looking at all that. So what we're going to make today is we're going to make a heart-healthy reduced sodium snack mix. Who loves Chex Mix? Love Chex Mix. But think about it. High sodium cereal, pretzels covered in salt, nuts covered in salt, bagel chips covered in salt. It is a super salty treat. That's why a lot of bars and restaurants love to serve those salty items as, think about popcorn machines or the peanut trays or when they have those snack mixes and stuff out. The reason they do that is because it makes you so thirsty. And what do you do when you're thirsty? You buy more to drink. So keep that in mind that they know what they're doing. All right, I'm going to grab my butter, which is in here. So we are going to make a Chex Mix today. different Chex cereals, and they were all right around 300 milligrams of sodium per serving. So these cereals actually have quite a bit of sodium in it. Wheat Chex have the least amount, but you can pick any type of cereal you want. I just went with this because it is whole grain and high in fiber, and since this is heart healthy, we're gonna stick with all our heart healthy ingredients. So you're gonna wanna do about 3 cups of your lower sodium cereal. Then we're gonna add our nuts. Now I picked this Nutrition. Like I said, I'm not advocating this brand. I just thought that this was a great option. It's a heart healthy mix. It has peanuts, almonds, pistachios, which gives your mix kind of a nice little green element to it, walnuts, and hazelnuts. So this is roughly only 40 milligrams. So it does have a little touch of sea salt in it, but 40 milligrams per serving. And I am gonna dump, if I can get it open, I'm just gonna go ahead and dump this whole mix in here. Then pretzels. I could not find pretzels without salt. I was looking. I did find these honey wheat pretzel braids that had half the amount of sodium. So I'm going to put those. So I have all my dry goods in there. Now for my seasoning. Unsalted butter. When you buy your butter in the grocery store, get the unsalted version. You really don't need salted unless you have a specific, and I'll get your question in a minute, Elizabeth, unless you have a specific recipe that calls for salted butter. So we're gonna pop this in the microwave for about 30 seconds or so, and then while that's cooking, if I can get it open, my goodness. Okay, I'm gonna pop this in the microwave, ignore my dog barking. Okay, so Elizabeth has a question about stevia. So what stevia is? Tito, hush. What? And you know, I would love to tell you I'm super professional, but I'm at home, right? I have kids in the house. Hold on. Hey, shush. Shh. Right? Yeah, I know. Hold on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Crazy. Okay, so stevia is a non-nutritive sweetener that is, it's non-caloric or really low caloric, but basically they took all the power of sugar and put it into a element that is like 100 times sweeter than sugar. That's why there's no calories to it, and it's used to sweeten. So that is where the stevia comes in. There is no indication saying whether it's safe or not safe. It's generally recognized as safe. It is used in a lot of different things. So having it every day in your tea isn't a bad idea. So give me 1 more minute. Tuned in today. All right, good news, the butter's ready. Right, someday we're gonna get back to the real world. Awesome, okay, Worcestershire sauce. So I have my 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I'm going to do a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce, if you can say the word, is high in sodium as well. However, this one is actually fairly low, 60 milligrams per teaspoon. So it's got a little bit. Now this isn't a salt-free snack mix. This is just much, much lower than your traditional snack mix. So instead of adding a seasoning salt, I am going to go with just a nice seasoning blend, a salt-free seasoning blend. So this is a garlic and herb seasoning blend. Then I'm going to add a little bit of onion powder. So anytime you go with the powder versus the salt, like onion powder, garlic powder versus the salt, you're going to get flavor without having that salt added. So we have our mix of cereal, unsalted nuts, low sodium pretzels. I'm going to drizzle this on. Then I like to put it in a bowl with a cover and then just shake it up. So you get the seasoning all over, and you're going to go ahead and put it on a cookie sheet. You just spread it out on a cookie sheet, making sure everything is nice and even, and you're going to stick it in the oven at 250 for an hour. This recipe is going to be posted on this link. I did submit this recipe. So I made this earlier, so this is what it looks like when it comes out. You have this nice whole grain, high protein, reduced sodium snack mix that you can have as a great snack. Now if you want to sweeten it up, add a handful of chocolate chips, add a handful of dried cranberries, add some raisins. There's lots of different things you can add to it. You can use your favorite kind of cereal. You can use goldfish crackers instead of the pretzels. You can find some lower sodium, great, wonderful things to do. So we have this yummy, crunchy, flavorful snack that can really help curb some of those cravings. So hopefully, I'm gonna just go through and make sure I'm not missing any questions. Perfect. All right, well, my patio furniture is here. That's why my doorbell was ringing. So I'm gonna let you go, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something today. Like I said, there's no need to cut the salt completely out of your diet, but just being a little more conscious of what kind of foods we pick, looking at your canned foods, looking at your processed foods, looking at your condiments, and seeing if we can just keep that salt shaker off the table is gonna help. Pepper, powders, salt-free seasonings, citrus. Citrus is a great way to flavor things. It's also high in potassium, which is good. So just keep some of those things in mind. I did submit a link that Anna's gonna post that talks about some great heart healthy recipes. It's heart.org/healthy living. So make sure you take a look at that. There's more information on sodium, some recipes, blood pressure, knowing your numbers, things like that. So everyone, take care, be safe, and stay healthy. Bye.